On this episode of the ITAV show, InfoComm International changes its name, changes the brand, and has a new direction. We also talk about voice control on the enterprise and streaming 4K. All that and more next on the ITAV show.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is the ITAV show, episode 9, recorded Friday, September 15th, 2017. Start with why.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by Kramer, AV Beyond the Box.
This is the ITAV show, a monthly look at how IT and AV kind of come together. My name is Tim Albright. I am your host. With us to talk about all the stories that we have gathered. First and foremost, his name is Paul Zealy. He works at Harman Professional. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Also with us is my buddy and pal and technologist and IT guy extraordinaire, Mr. Michael Drainer from Drainer Technologies.
Good day, gentlemen and ladies that may be out there.
Yeah, these are all three guys. So,
well, but there's lady listeners.
Yes, there we are. All right. Last but not least, Mr. Justin O'Connor. He is the host of the brand spanking new AV Report. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, so here's we're going to start with a story that's not inherently IT and AV, but it has to do with a name change. And my entire AV career, InfoComm International has been known as actually 2 or 3 different things. But InfoComm is the trade association for the audiovisual professional community. This past Wednesday, we're recording this on Friday, September 15th. They changed their name. They changed the name of the organization, not the trade show. The trade show is still going to be called InfoComm, but they changed it to AVIXA, Audiovisual and Integrated Experience Association. Paul, I'm going to start with you on this. The question for this show in this format and the audience we're trying to reach, which are folks that deal in IT and AV both, one of the things that InfoComm announced as they were transitioning to AVIXA, which is how you say it, was that they were looking to, get more involved in the experience, right? To get our members more involved in creating exceptional experiences, and also to reach out to folks who may not consider themselves part of the quote unquote traditional AV community, but they absolutely contribute to it, whether that be, design professionals, IT professionals who support and make AV systems happen. Does this name change help in that effort?
Well, it's a name change.
Okay.
And so I think it's interesting because I'm an old guy. And so this announcement, and I wasn't at it, but from what I've seen, there was a lot of belief that there was a confusion and awareness of the trade show, but not independently of the trade association. So when they said InfoComm, people immediately associated with the show and weren't aware of the trade association. Interestingly, 8-10 years ago now, they changed the name from ICIA to InfoComm because people were aware of the trade show and not of the trade association. And that way it would make it happen. So instead of saying, hey, do you know about InfoComm? And they say, yes, it's a trade show. They can now say, have you heard about AVIXA? And the answer will be who? This may fix their base problem, but it still doesn't change the need for the marketing and outreach effort, and the name doesn't make the application. So when you do a rebranding, the other part of it is to show a renewed commitment to a direction and path. So assuming that InfoComm follows through on that and achieves their goals, and I don't have any particular insight as to what those other goals are. I have my feelings of what's important about InfoComm. That's fine. but the name change in of itself is just a way to get out to the industry that we're going to refocus. And then the proof is in the pudding if that refocus works.
If that refocus works, yeah. Michael, same kind of question to you, and Paul brought it up, is this refocus, does this help them refocus and go after, again, they've been talking about the AV IT convergence for, this is 2017, 14, 15 years now, right? So does that help them refocus to go after some of those IT folks?
That's a tough question to answer, right? So, Paul made a good point, right? It's just a matter of definition and to what you're communicating to the industry as a whole. I don't think a name change helps that communication. That's something that could be accomplished under the name of InfoComm, ICIA. You could do marketing outreach and campaigns around whatever the name is, right? It's a matter of who and what you are, and the name does not necessarily create the identity. And so I understand what they're trying to accomplish, but my perspective is it's just going to create greater confusion within the industry, right? It's going to create a little bit of an identity crisis as to who are we really? And Paul made the point that, we were ICIA and then we became InfoComm because there was confusion and an identity issue in being able to associate the association with the trade show. Now you're going to depart from that. So just what is the message, right? Take the message under your current guise. If you need to establish a new presence, then launch a new campaign under that experiential umbrella and bring that back into the association. But that doesn't mean you have to necessarily change the identity of the association in order to accomplish that. All that said, I'm not a marketing expert, but I know some firm got paid a whole lot of money to come up with, this idea. And so I see it as just a very costly endeavor to not only raise brand awareness and to rebrand, but also to raise market awareness into different verticals and different channels that they're trying to target. So instead of just the cost of going after the channels and the verticals, they're also having to rebrand not only to those guys, but also to our own organization.
So here's the thing, and you mentioned the fact that our industry has been under a little bit of an identity crisis. I would actually agree with you. I'm not saying that InfoComm as the trade association has been.
No, the industry as a whole. Yeah. The industry as a whole.
And part of that brand, that identity crisis, is the influx of IT and the connection to IT the way it has gone. Justin, does this help that? Does this help define that in any way, shape, or form, or does it hamper that whole IT AV coming together?
I don't think it in and of itself does either.
Okay.
I think so my take on this is in B2B industries, you are what you do, not what you say you do.
That's it.
We have in other industries, in other places, you can get away with more style without substance, so to speak. And you can get away with a little in our industry, but in B2B, you really are what you do. So they have their 10-point plan that was part of this rollout. And on paper, it looks great. The question is, will it all happen and how will it happen? So they could have done all of that without a name change. Mm-hmm. Or they could have done a name change with none of this planning and then still have done all these things without having said, here's our 10-point plan. They could have executed that without even having publicized it or even committed to it. In the next few years, those could have been their actions. So the fact that they have a new name, we have it, we have a Vixen now. I think that's helpful in the sense that they are introducing themselves to brand new people and they get to come at all these brand new people, or at least this is the plan, to have a new audience, an expanded audience. They get to come at these folks with fancy words like AV and integrated experience. That doesn't hurt. InfoComm is kind of, I don't know, it feels old and dry, and introducing themselves to new people with that, it just doesn't, I don't know. I think the name change helps with the new crowd. With those of us who are kind of jaded, we're like, it's just a name change, and we make jokes about what it sounds like.
Because we've been through this before.
Of course. Yeah. And and that's the other thing. We've been through this before. We've been through this before. So the question is, what will they actually do?
Yeah.
That's what matters the most. And I tend to be optimistic, and I hope they're going to follow through on what they have laid out. And if they do, that's successful. Will it help or hinder the actual convergence? I don't think it has any influence over the actual convergence, because that happens kind of boots on the ground every day in the enterprises where the industries are actually converging.
Well, and let's talk about what the role of the association even is, right? What is the role of InfoComm, Avixa, ICI, whatever it is, right? It's awareness, it's supporting the industry, lobbying for the industry. So if it nets a positive gain for the industry as a whole, I'm all for it. I just don't know that a name change per se is going to make that happen. And I'm with Justin. It all comes down to execution. And it could have been executed with or without it. Name change could have come later or not at all. It wouldn't matter. It really comes down to the execution of that plan.
All right, Justin mentioned enterprise. We're going to talk about that for a few minutes here. I had the opportunity to go and cover CEDIA, the CEDIA Expo 2017 last week. And one of the neat things that came out of it was from a company called Origin Acoustics. And Origin Acoustics took an Amazon Dot and installed it into the ceiling with one of their ceiling speaker enclosures. And I wrote about at the time that I see this being how the Amazon platform can get into corporate because you can hide it, right? The Dot connects to an amplifier. It allows you to send that audio through a whole room system. You can interface that way. It has 4 zones or 6 zones. And then you can, as of last year, you could connect the Amazon platform to Crestron. You can connect it to Control 4. You can connect it to some other mostly residential control systems. Crestron is the only exception. Control 4 does have a small footprint in commercial. Here's what I want to start with you guys on this. And Paul, I want to start with you. Where do you see voice in corporate, and what's the impact on the enterprise network of voice control? You're muted, sir.
I apologize. Here I am being polite. This is it.
Don't be polite. That's why I invited you.
Well, this is an interesting subject, and I will right now state that that the things I'm going to say are not necessarily held by the company I happen to work for.
Well, and real quickly before you start that, Harman is going down a different road for voice because they're partnering with Watson.
They're also, but there are parts of Harman partnering with Amazon, and Harman's a big company. They partner with everything.
With everybody.
The partnership with Watson is specifically in the hospitality space.
Okay.
Around the interfaceless hotel room. Whether or not that effort expands into other places within the Harman Professional, but there's an issue in these high-end hotels saying people need to come in and control a room, and how do we deal with that? And you know, quite frankly, AMX has never played well in that market because it's just a too pricey sort of thing. And the hotels don't necessarily want the infrastructure problems of putting in touch panels and everything else. They want something that just kind of exists in there. As it works out, Harman had a beautiful JBL alarm clock with a lot of processing power in it already. And they've done these concepts, and they're moving forward with it. They've demonstrated it. It actually works. Whether or not the market demands it, we'll find out. But when we talk about the meeting space and the professional space, I am not necessarily a huge proponent of voice control. And the reason is because there are some misconceptions around the whole thing. When I talk to customers who come in and say, I want to do voice control, my job as a strategist is not to say, oh yeah, we can do voice control in your conference room. It's to say, what is the problem that you are trying to solve that you perceive voice is going to fix that problem? And the problem that I inevitably get, it says, I want to come in and say, start my meeting. Nobody says, I want to be able to easily call out in a loud and clear voice, conference room, please switch laptop 1 to the monitor. Nobody has come out and said they want that. Some have said cost, clean lines, some of those things, but for the most part, they say start my room. The problem in saying come in and start my meeting is not a problem of interface. It's a problem of database, presence, identity, scheduling. It is not a voice problem. And if I had all those things, I don't need voice. I can start their meeting based on a proximity sensor triggered off of their phone, their ID tag, walking into a room. I don't need it to be voice control. So I really think in a lot of cases, in the conference room setting, voice is a solution looking for a problem. And the real things that people perceive of voice and AI, I'm not saying that AI is bad. It's a great thing to learn about what a teacher wants to do with their room and start it up. I just don't necessarily think that voice is the right interface. So that's kind of my take on it. But ultimately, I think it's really important to solve all of those other background problems. And then voice becomes another type of button in my arsenal if that's appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Justin, same kind of question to you. What's it, as you know, Paul made a good point about it being another button in the arsenal. One that I honestly think that commercial dealers are going to have to deal with sooner rather than later. So as they're having that conversation, what sort of impact is this going to have on the network, and what do the IT managers need to understand about it?
Yeah, I fully agree with a lot of what Paul had to say. I think it's the commercial industry, the integrators and the IT managers are going to have to deal with it, whether it's a good solution or not. It just in terms of people saying, I want to be able to do it, as Paul was saying. Their constituency will say, I want it. So that automatically means they have to deal with it. Now, what deal with it means can vary. A less responsible tech manager or integrator will say, okay, fine, and just put it in there. But that's what that counts as dealing with it, just not dealing with it well. But yeah, the follow-on question is why? What is it that you can't do that you think this will do for you? And you brought up Watson. I remember when that story came out, what I thought was really good about Watson is what in turn related to what Paul was saying is what could be bad about voice in the conference space or the enterprise voice. Because Watson's whole point is that you don't have the computing behind it, that system is that people can just speak in language that is logical to them. Because the idea is these are hotel guests. They're not savvy. They just want, hey, I want to watch TV. Watson can interpret that. They can speak in natural language. They don't need to know commands. They don't need to know specifically what they're asking for, like laptop 1, for example. Yeah. So the computing power of Watson is there to interpret natural language into system commands. In the conference space, if you have a voice system, but it has a complicated menu structure and it doesn't have the infrastructure, as Paul was saying, to back up the type of switching, the type of access rights, the type of scheduling and identification, then that even further complicates the menu of things that you have to go through in your voice commands. Isn't a touchscreen button 10 times easier, 100 times easier, depending. So yes, they're going to have to deal with it because their constituents are going to say, I want it. How they deal with it then is just as Paul said, you have to start peeling the onion, saying what is it you feel you can't do that this will enable for you.
All right, Michael. Michael's primary client base is small to medium-sized businesses with offices both in the home and at their locations. As you may not have been asked this question yet, but you probably will be eventually. What are those questions? What is it that you're trying to get to, and how do you get to it?
Yeah, these guys summed it up pretty well, and I think the response is similar despite the client size. Always start with why. Why are you wanting to do what you're asking? Because today, voice control tends to add complexity for complexity's sake. And it's not really solving unique problems. Now, I definitely see it in the realm of accessibility, and in areas where control could be complicated by physical interfaces, but that's by and large the exception and not the rule. So from a support standpoint in infrastructure and systems, we're getting there, right? We're getting there in capability. It works well in the residence. Well, it works okay in the residential world. But as you move into the corporate environment and into the business environment, it can definitely complicate things because there's so much that goes into supporting the method behind the madness. And, Paul did a really good job of describing that there are so many criteria for a varying number of users. In your residential space, it learns about you and your family and what your particular habits are. In the business world, there's so many people involved. And as you know, the multi-purpose nature of a lot of the rooms that we're dealing with constitutes a tremendous amount of if this, then that's going on. It's just a tremendous amount of complexity for a little bit of convenience that at the end of the day really isn't more convenient.
More convenient because it's more difficult to interface with.
Well, more convenient for the end user because they can just simply walk in and say what they want, right? Versus just pushing a button. What's the difference, right? But the same thing happens with control systems. I mean, you in your control system experience have come across this before, where the tremendous amount of complexity and macros to try to accomplish several different sets of commands with one push of the button. But what does it take to go through that in defining what those actions are going to be based upon a particular command?
A very scary thing.
It is.
It's called talking to the client.
Exactly. But that goes back to why, right? Why do you want? So it's just a new control interface. But, sometimes the visualization of options is actually easier to deal with than trying to remember what is it I'm supposed to say, and remember what a menu structure is. And we've all been there, right? You've rented a car, you have a vehicle, and you hit the VR button, and it's like, what do you want to do? You can make a call, you can enter an address, by the time you go through all that, just push the stinking button.
All right. Last story here real quick, guys. And this is inherently, AV or IT. It's kind of a mixture of both, which is why I want to do it. Apple had their event this week. They announced a bunch of things. You can get a $1,000 iPhone if you want, which is still crazy to me. But the real thing I wanted to get to is their Apple TV and take that conversation down a little bit further. And the new Apple TV is going to do 4K, ultra sharp 4K resolution. Streaming. And then, Michael, I want to start with you because you used to be a broadcast engineer, and you and I have had discussions about whether or not you're really getting 1080 on your cable systems because of the compression. Infrastructures now, today, can they handle 4K streaming? And if they can't, what do they have to do to get there?
It's all about compression. I mean, we know that to be able to deliver 4K reliably, given the bandwidths that are currently available, if you're in a major metro area and you have access to good bandwidth, you're going to have a great experience.
What is good? What is good to you? What is good bandwidth?
Well, it depends on what the bandwidth requirements are of the particular video content, right? So if it requires 100 meg service, we can get 100 meg service where we are today, right? But you go 2 blocks down the street, you can't get more than 3 megasecond over DSL. So infrastructure is still a big deal, not only for residential, but also for business customers. And I see that all the time where business clients can't get more than 10 or 15 megasecond. You're not going to deliver 4K without artifacts and a tremendous amount of buffering and whatnot in that environment. So I think it's a really cool effort. And I think that the market's definitely going that way, especially in the residential space. The consumers are starting to demand that content be delivered in 4K resolution because they're buying these beautiful 4K TVs. But the reality is that the current delivery mediums and the compression just isn't quite there yet, in my opinion, to deliver the experience that they're hoping they're going to get.
All right, Mr. Zealy, same kind of question. What do IT managers need to understand to get 4K down the pipe?
Well, if you look at in the Apple TV market and the consumer market, Netflix recommends 25 megabits per second sustained download speed for 4K. Sustained.
Down. Yeah.
Right. In reality, I think they're encoding at somewhere around 18 megabits. And so there's a couple of interesting things to think about. And I don't know if Netflix has moved away from H.265 and gone to VP9 or what they're using for their compression algorithms. That's primarily there's some licensing fights going on in the world about what's going to be used for that. But the interesting thing that happens in content and the home market versus the network manager and commercial market is the fact that Netflix doesn't care if they take this movie that they get in some big raw cinema format and stick it on a server, and it takes 10 days to compress it optimally at all the different speeds and resolutions they need to do. They're getting it a month in advance. They're pre-announcing it. They're optimizing and being able to do a very optimized compression. Because they have that kind of time, they're able to do it, on regular GPUs and everything else. To get 4K at 20 megabits per second in real time is a very computationally expensive process for quality. The interesting thing about compression is that nobody tells you when they say, oh, we can do H.265 at 20 megabits per second. The only thing required to make the claim that you are compressing according to that algorithm across all algorithms is that it can be decoded by the standardized decoder. Okay. So when people say, I can do this algorithm at this bandwidth, it is less a testament to their skill in encoding than their capacity to ignore crappy video. And there's remarkable differences between algorithms because there's lots of ways you can get to that. So I go back and forth with 4K. There are absolutely places that it's wonderful. I covet, and at some point here, probably based on my next computer upgrade, I'm switching from my two 24-inch monitors as my basic desktop setup to a 48-inch 4K as my basic desktop system, because I just like the idea of more real estate, more pixels, that sort of thing. For home cinema and what you would call immersive content, great. For critical viewing and analysis, great. For the conference room, you've got content limitations, you've got sight lines, you've got the fact that people are sitting 10 feet away. So where are you getting advantages of 4K, which really demands you're sitting under 1.8 times the screen height and some various other things. So I don't see this Apple TV as really impacting my market. I think it's a great thing on the consumer side. I'm very likely to buy one because I like the idea of being able to do that. And if there's some movie I really want to see in 4K, because I live in a major metropolitan area, I have a good sustained 60 megabits per second on my $40 a month Fios internet.
I'm jealous.
So I'm able to take advantage of that. So I really think what we're going to see on the enterprise side in 4K, if they choose 4K, and once again, they're going to, because they're customers, and 4 is better than 2. And when you start to talk to a end user or technology manager about things like visual acuity and the eye can only see 0.1 radians and all of this, it gets lost, and they say 4 is more than 2 and go with it. We're going to really see the advances for a long time in the lightly compressed areas with the SDVOE people and their 10 gigabit solution, so the app division, and now whoever bought AVNation, and then the Intipix TICO area, which is what's done by SVSI and Evertz and several others, which brings it down into the gigabit range, because the major application is within a campus and bandwidth is cheap inside a campus. It's much cheaper to make sure I have clear 800 megabits between the places I need to go than to buy a $8,000 real-time compressor. And so I think this is another split in the consumer world and everything else. And, you know, unfortunately, the professional AV world stopped being the driver of technology years ago, which is why we have things like the HDMI connector and
that's actually
HDCP,
that's actually why I asked the question.
Else.
Yeah, that's why I asked the question, because consumer is driving professional. So
they will perceive that, but I have yet to meet a commercial integrator who is happy when a customer asks them to put an Apple TV in their conference room.
Well, and I would agree with that, but they still ask and they still do it.
Yeah. Oh no, they have to do it. And if what they need to do is download, then your only issue is on a corporate level. If, first of all, why are they watching 4K downloaded content? And because
they have a 120-inch 4K screen,
right,
4K system.
But then on that point is going to be, interestingly enough, a lot of corporations have less raw bandwidth for large organizations than I do, because ISPs license them differently on the way things work. And I can tell you that if I started having more than one conference room within Harman, pulling down 18 gigabits per second sustained, that eventually my network people, and I don't even know if I can get to Netflix, or those other things, but that is a major impact on a shared resource on a corporate network. And it's the same thing that goes in with voice, goes in with controlling from your phone. In a residential environment, the impacts of things going wrong aren't critical. You yell at your children, they stop what they're doing, and you go back to the football game. But in a corporate environment, those are career limiting. You know, if I say, oh, everybody's going to run their conference room off their phone, and everybody has the ability to control every conference room, and somebody accidentally starts flipping slides in the boardroom because they connected the wrong conference room, that's a tragic thing. It's not at all a tragic thing in the home. You yell at your children because they're annoying. So these are the issues that we have to be able to communicate into the corporate market to keep them from making these mistakes, because they perceive it as being the same thing. But very much to the point made earlier, when you start to scale into a multi-user, multifunctional environment, the level of complexity, and with that level of complexity, the level of error possibilities go up, as well as the impact of those errors.
Yeah.
Well, and just to kind of simplify on that, though, is you know, and you made a valid point, right? If you've got a 100 meg connection at home and you got 20, 30 people in your office, you know, you don't have 2 or 3, 100 gig, of service run into your environment, right? You've got the same 100 meg pipe, right? Going to serve those 20 or 30 people. So once you start streaming, the experience is completely different. So you could take this down to just simple math for these guys. Look, you got a gigabit connection, but you got 300 people in this office and you want to run 4K in 10 conference rooms. Simple math dictates this isn't going to be realistic, right? So you could get down the complex road, but sometimes just taking the simplistic approach with the end user is all that's needed.
All right, Justin, is this a tree I shouldn't be barking up at all when it comes to 4K?
Well, you have to. It's the same as the voice. It's going to be asked for. The constituency is going to say, we want 4K. And it's the same thing. It's the why. It's what these guys have just been talking about. It's what we talked about with voice. Why do you believe you need 4K? If they're going to budget for 4K displays and they're going to watch Netflix in the enterprise, great, because it's not real time. And not great because it won't, sometimes it'll work and sometimes it won't, but that's a different career management problem for the people that are deploying it. But if you need real-time 4K, and there are applications for it, high precision telemetry or data watching, or, we have real-time video of oil rigs as they're drilling. I mean, there are safety applications. Real-time 4K has applications. If that is your business and that is what you do, then if your conversation about your network is about what Netflix needs, then you're already in the wrong place. It requires the dedicated back end to deliver real-time 4K. Again, there are applications for it, there are needs for it, so you have to build for it. But yeah, you're not barking up the wrong tree, because it's going to be there. And all of these people who are voices in the ear of the tech manager or the decision makers are consumers. So the consumer market, that's one of the reasons consumer technology is driving what we're talking about in the commercial space. And they want 4K, they're going to ask for 4K. So and Apple TV maybe they don't even want an Apple TV, but they got excited because they saw that there's a new Apple TV.
And that starts the conversation about putting 4K on the network. Gotcha.
Yeah, and absolutely there are applications, and those applications go all over the place, and there will always be a bandwidth cost trade-off. I can very inexpensively push very good 4K down 10 gigabit, but I have to have those pipes, which is going to limit me to where I can put those in and the switches. And if I need those things, and this wasn't 4K, actually it was 1024 by 768, but I worked on a project 15 years ago now where a big oil and gas driller spent a ridiculous amount of money to remote keyboard, video, and mouse out to oil rigs, because they didn't want to put a supercomputer on the oil rigs. And so they put the networks, and we worked with the bandwidths that they had in these networks going out to oil rigs, so that the geologists on the oil rigs could get to and control the supercomputer. And we were essentially extending out the monitors for those things. And I can't remember exactly what it was, but at the time it was $100,000, a link. And one would be using it at a time, but on the other hand, they didn't have to put this $30 million computer in harm's way, and they got to share it on all those oil rigs. There's always going to be applications like that,
and
real-time monitoring and satellite analysis and all these things. My argument is mostly the conference room where I want to throw up a PowerPoint or a spreadsheet is not necessarily, resolution is not the driving factor in that application. And my biggest issue is always when we pick a single data point as a qualifier, because design is really looking at what am I trying to do and what are the constraints. Resolution is not the biggest constraint if I want to show PowerPoints in a conference room. Yeah. Very similarly, as we talk about latency is not the biggest constraint if it leaves the room. So do I need a ultra low latency 10 gigabit link if I'm sending it across the campus? No, nobody's going to notice that it's getting there 200 milliseconds later because they're not in the same room, and nobody's going to mind. So it all becomes, look at the overall application and determine for those segments what are, the requirements. And once you meet the requirements, you go on to the next constraint that's going to kill you. And sooner or later, you run out of options and you say, I guess we have a design because, as I've worked through all the things, we can get this far with what exists.
I guess we have a design. All right, we'll stop it there. It all comes back to why. Oh, goodness. Mr. O'Connor, thank you for joining us, sir.
Thanks for having me. It was great.
How do people find you and or the brand new AV report?
They can find me most easily on the Twitters at the AV Report or at JOC Audio Pro, no spaces or punctuations. Both of those are me, and they can watch the AV Report on YouTube by searching the AV Report.
The AV Report. All right. Mr. Zealy, it's a pleasure as always, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
How do people find you and or Harmon Professional?
Well, they can always find Harmon Professional at harmon.com and wander through the various links to things or the various brands that I deal with, AMX, JBL, BSS, Crown, Martin, SVSI, all of these various things. Reaching me personally, if you should be talking to me, you already know how to get a hold of me. Otherwise, go through the appropriate channels and you'll be vetted and eventually I'll talk to you.
Right. Mr. Drainer, how do people find you or Drainer Technology?
DrainerTechnologies.com or at Michael Drainer on Twitter.
All right. My name is Tim Albright. Don't follow me on the Twitters because I'm already complaining about the Bears season. But go by the website if you would, please, AVNation.tv. AVNation.tv, you'll find this program and a host of others. While you're there, check out our underwriters section. These are the folks that help us do what we do, and Harmon is one of those, so we thank them for their support. Also, check out some of our other programs. We have a weekly wrap-up of the audio-visual news and information from a commercial standpoint called AV Week. We also have one that covers the residential called Resi Week. Check those out and others as well, all at avnation.tv, avnation.tv. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. This has been the ITAV Show.